Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this demo. A big shout out to Wacom, Amber, and Joe for getting me to GDC to demo this live. Hope you all like this video. I'm going to be showing you as many tricks as possible for creating content in ZBrush. Let's get started. Alright, I'm starting with the basic sphere in ZBrush. Usually I open Lightbox and grab one of the Dynawax meshes just because I like the interface. It's already set up, the camera looks pretty cool, so I usually use that. I'm just masking out areas. I kind of have an idea of what I want to do, so I'm just kind of figuring that out now. I like to immediately place markers for myself so I know where things are going to be placed. So that's why I sculpted out those eye shapes really quick, because I needed everything else to kind of follow that direction. Quickly sculpted in a mouth, very roughly. I'm not too worried about geometry or dynameshing anything right now. I just want to get in as many shapes as I can so I can stay motivated and excited about my concept. I'm just exploring shapes right now. I use clay buildup brush because it gives you a lot of happy mistakes, similar to a grain in pencil strokes. Whenever I sculpt in eyes, I try to add zygomatic shapes underneath the eyes to kind of remind me that I need to create some kind of skeleton underneath this. So because I've sculpted so much, I needed to fix the geometry, so I duplicated my mesh, dynameshed it, and am projecting the detail from the previous mesh back onto it. And then I delete the old mesh because I don't need it anymore. So now I have clean, fresh geometry. There was no detail to begin with, so it's okay to start off like this. What I just did is I stored a morph target. When you do that, any additional changes that you make to your mesh, you can separate it into a separate subtool. Just don't dynamesh, don't do anything crazy, just sculpt. Don't do anything else to it. And you see I hit create difference. It creates a separate tool. You just hit insert and you can bring in that other piece of geometry that you sculpted. And then you can delete your morph target or switch back. You'll see a switch button also to go back to how the mesh looked before you created those shapes. Just adding some hard surface shapes. Again, just exploring what this guy is going to be. I just keep sculpting until I find like a bit of a motif. So right now he's looking a little like cute but mischievous at the same time, so I kind of got that in the back of my head while I'm sculpting. And whenever areas look kind of plain and boring, I try to sculpt them out and try to bring out shapes because it could influence the design. I use the move tool quite a bit. I'll use it a lot, especially in this demo, to constantly change a silhouette. I'm usually rotating my model quite a bit, and when I'm doing that I'm looking at the overall shapes that I'm seeing because the silhouette needs to be very strong. So I kind of have a custom brush. All it is a simple standard brush with a lazy mouse, and I drag it to create those little lines that help emphasize certain areas. Like it could be hard surface planes that I'm trying to bring out, or I'm just cutting into the mesh for additional detail. So I insert eyes, I insert sphere and split mask so I can separate them. After I do that, I duplicate it, duplicate the eyes that is, then inflate the duplication so that way I can carve into them and create eyelids quickly. I highly recommend using the insert mesh brushes. You can get a lot for little. So these are default ZBrush meshes here. I'm using them kind of as a base for some spikes I'm going to put on. I chose a sphere that was a part of my tool list, and I hit make polymesh 3D. I just clicked on the wrong mesh, that's why I had trouble there. Now I'm just going to make a little spike so that way I can turn it into an insert mesh brush, so that way I can drag it onto the creature's back. So a lot of detail, a lot of work. Well, that's what it's going to look like, but in reality I'm just going to sculpt one roughly and it'll look like I did a lot of work. I definitely encourage all of you to browse ZBrush's interface because there's quite a bit of tools that are very useful and could definitely speed things up. Everyone sculpts differently, but a lot of people use the same tools. Every now and then you'll discover something small. So I'm decimating this guy. So Z plugin, pre-process, and then when it's done I decimate it. Because I want it to be fairly low res, so when I start dragging it on to my other mesh, it won't be super dense. When you create an insert mesh, it's based on your camera view. So I'm recreating it, create insert mesh, and when I go back it should drag on correctly. See that? So when you drag them out, if you kind of move your mouse a little bit, you can make them thick and thin. So that's what I was doing to vary them up a little bit. And I separated them so that way I wouldn't get in the way of my sculpting on the body. So I know he needs legs, he needs something. So I'm going to try the Morph Target thing again. So I'm going to store Morph Target and use a snake hook tool, which I use quite a bit, and drag out some quick legs. There's plenty of ways to do this. You can just create one leg and then repeat it throughout the mesh, but because I'm sculpting and I still don't know what I want to do, I'm just going to drag out shapes. So I hit create difference and I hit switch also, so that way the mesh went back to the way it was before I sculpted on it, and it separated the geometry for me. Then I went to insert and inserted the geometry. So I cut the tips off of the feet because I wanted it to all be on the same plane on the floor there. I always check to make sure that the anatomy makes sense. I know these are creatures, but it's important that visually it's understandable. And you notice I go back to different areas. Sometimes I'll work an area just really quick and then leave it and come back later. It's because I want to stay excited about what I'm working on, so that's why I jump around quite a bit. Because working on one area may inspire me to do something to another area. This is my trim dynamic brush. I know there's damn standard, I think it's called, but I don't use it. I've always used trim dynamic. Polygroups, very useful. You can select areas very quickly, so that way they're untouched while you modify areas. Yeah, I just thought the face wasn't dynamic enough. There weren't enough shadows. Big tip, something that I learned from work from some very talented artists, is as you rotate your material, you notice the very dark areas that are pretty much black. Those are things that are going to read immediately whenever there's a new light source. So as I'm sculpting, I make sure that those read. It's the equivalent of having thick to thin lines while you draw. So if those read, then you know you're doing the right thing. Losing control of these teeth. Then clean them up a little bit. With teeth, for sketches like this, I'll just drag them out like I showed you with the Morph Target. Sometimes I'll bring in some preset teeth that I have, just normal human teeth and gums, and I'll place those and manipulate those. But for this stuff, I mean, I really want to just maintain the momentum I have and sculpt away. I don't want to stop for anything. When I started in ZBrush, I started out with just sculpting heads. After that, I went into sculpting the top half of the body, and then after that, the arms. I just kind of broke it up into different days, different exercises, because in the beginning I wanted to sculpt full characters, but I would just get kind of discouraged because it was so much work, and I would just lose interest, and that prevented me from finishing anything. But after practicing individual sections of a concept, I guess I trained my brain to know what shapes needed to be there and how to do it in ZBrush. So eventually I got much faster and it wasn't an issue anymore. Also, through practicing in ZBrush, you'll kind of remember what you can do in ZBrush to make things look more finished with very simple brush strokes. Like you'll see that I just push and pull shapes to make it look like I did more than I actually did. So sometimes when I'm working on creatures that have kind of gnarly legs like this guy should have, I'll create one leg with symmetry turned on in the center of the scene and really flesh it out, because again it's symmetrical, and then once it's pretty fleshed out, what I'll do is I'll duplicate it and move it off to the right side of the creature, you know, as his first arm, and then duplicate it, mirror it over, and just keep doing that, and it looks like you have a lot of work done when in reality you just worked on one leg. So see how I just pulled out those points on the front of the leg there? Again, it's a sketch. It's the equivalent of just a quick brush stroke. See what I'm doing with the edges? I like to emphasize them with that brush with the lazy mouse. It's just something I picked up. It's kind of like outlining, I guess. I feel like it makes it look like it's more hard surface than it is. So those legs need to connect somewhere on the body, so that's what I'm thinking about right now. These two legs, I got to separate them because them being welded together is going to be a problem. Also, I'm realizing that I could just sculpt one of these legs out, like I mentioned earlier, and just duplicate them and move them. So I'm going to fix the geometry using inflate brush because the geometry is too flat, close together. So whenever I delete geometry and need a hard edge, what I'll do is use slice curve and slice off whatever I need. What'll happen is it'll create a sharp polygroup. I'll hide the polygroup that I don't want, delete hidden, and then I'll use close holes to close the holes. I prefer it over clip curve because clip curve can sometimes just flatten out the polys or points, and rotate your mesh, you'll notice it's just a flat plane, and then you have to get rid of that, and it's a huge mess. But clip curve, it is pretty useful sometimes. So if I would have done what I mentioned earlier, just created one leg and detailed it out and duplicated it, I wouldn't have to do what I'm doing right now, which is doing twice the work because it's not symmetrical. The leg detail isn't going to be symmetrical, so it's twice the work pretty much, because I have to mirror everything over. I forgot to split this geometry from the back. So see, I just moved away from the legs because I kind of needed a break from it. I'm kind of in a good rhythm now, so I'm using my trim dynamic to kind of create some hard shapes, and I'm using my little custom lazy mouse brush to emphasize some forms. So I'll do this a lot because I feel like it reads automatically as something that's hard surface, like it's a solid plane, but in reality it's just organic planes. Back to the leg. See, just using a snake hook to pull out shapes. One thing I recommend that anyone using ZBrush practicing notice that I just saved. I do that quite a bit. I won't save for the longest time because I don't save unless I'm happy with something. Usually, sometimes I just forget to save and I crash ZBrush and have to redo it. That's part of the reason why I got a lot faster. It's because it kept crashing. What I was saying before is I recommend everyone practice working on subtlety. Like if you look at the ZBrush artists that you admire now, you'll notice that in their design they have big shapes that read easily, and in their detail it's very subtle. It's strong but very subtle, to the point where it's more of a third read or fourth read. You recognize the big shapes first and everything else is kind of last. So see this? I have all my big shapes there, kind of deltoid bicep kind of thing going on, and everything else is just the fun stuff, the fun little detail stuff. Clay buildup. I also use the square alpha that it comes with. It just gives you so many awesome little awesome mistakes that really help flesh out a concept. Now, when sculpting this, I'm also thinking about reference that I've seen before, like a king crab is something that I thought of while I was doing this. How they had those sharp little points everywhere, and so I just went with it. It's very important to look at reference. The more reference you look at, the more you study your reference, the more your visual and mental library will develop. So when you have to do kind of concepts straight out of your head, when you start just sculpting randomly, you'll start to see things that look familiar, and you'll try to interpret that along with other reference that you've seen in the past, and you'll create something that's a lot of fun. If you don't look at reference often and you kind of just reference other people's artwork, you're just going to end up copying other people's artwork because that's all you've seen. So definitely check out reference. Something reminds you of something, look up that image and see what it looks like. You don't have to stare at it for like an hour, just check it out, see what forms you can incorporate into your design. So adding some gums for the teeth, emphasizing them a bit more. The detail, notice that I kind of am manually adding the detail rather than grabbing like an alpha or something like that. I'll do that a lot for my sketches. I'll just use whatever ZBrush has. I don't go too crazy with bringing in alphas and whatnot. I guess I should, but it's just not how I was taught. So I feel like the top of the head is meant to be a different material than the bottom half, because the bottom half feels more like flesh, obviously. So I want to kind of separate the head from the body in a way with shapes. And again, thinking about that king crab, adding some consistency in shapes and forms. So I have spikes everywhere, all this nasty, gnarly stuff. Even in the front, just everywhere. And that's what's fun, is whenever you look at your concept, just make sure you're doing things that make all the shapes consistent. See, I'm constantly rotating, looking at the silhouette. How could it improve? I know this is an issue here, how the legs connect to the body. So I'm going to have to address that. Yeah, I didn't like just manually sculpting in there. I thought it was just too vague. So I see little shapes and kind of like the grain of my brush. I love emphasizing that stuff. Front legs, there definitely has to be something different about staying consistent with the design, but I need to do a little something to kind of separate them, to make it clear that the front legs serve a different purpose, or the anatomy of it is different. See, I kind of get rid of the straight lines. I'm just breaking up as many smooth surfaces as I can, just to make everything look a little busy. And notice I really don't use any crazy brushes. It's kind of all the same thing, just over and over, slightly modified maybe, but pretty much same brushes over and over. Altogether, I think this took me about 50 or 60 minutes. I mean, sometimes it'll take me a little bit longer to do these sketches. It really depends on the idea. Again, so adding some consistency, bringing in these guys as kind of a base. Maybe this body that it's in serves as some kind of shell. So kind of maybe it's like some metal shell or something like that, or man-made shell, and these are, I guess, the sleeves of that shell. So transparency is in the bottom right there next to a ghost. and polyframe. It's pretty useful if you need to add something underneath a piece of geometry or behind a piece of geometry, and you gotta make everything else kind of go away for a second. So I need to make space for the joints there, so that's why I sculpted that really quick. I can't emphasize enough that it's really important that you look at reference and study your reference. If you copy your reference through sketches, that's great. Even having it with you is cool. Usually I'll just kind of look at it for a little while and then take some of the first impressions I got from the reference and include it in whatever I'm working on. Because it's the first impressions that, in my opinion, what really matter when you look at reference and apply them to creatures. And also while you're sculpting, try to think of what material something could be, if it's kind of a shell quality or if it's organic and fleshy. Definitely things you want to think about. And add structure to it, like a skeleton or something like that, so it looks like it can function in reality. I change the materials pretty often. That's something I learned also from some really talented artists. So you can check to see how it looks with different materials and make sure your sculpture looks good with different lighting situations. Highly recommend doing that. It definitely helps a lot. So what I used is in Z plugin there's a Transpose Master. When you hit the first button, T-pose, it combines your mesh, the lowest resolutions of your mesh, and sends it to a new scene completely combined. So you can manipulate it, and when you hit the T-pose button after that, it'll send everything back to the original scene completely separated and puts it back at its highest resolution. It's a great way to modify silhouettes and whatnot. So again, changing materials. These are some custom materials I got from some coworkers and friends that I really love. They like this particular one that I have on is great for just trying to sculpt as much detail as you want, because it shows you everything. Putting in a little plane here just for fun. I'm definitely liking the way it looks. So I choose a white material that's top lit and turn on posterize, and I kind of check out my my design using that. So to see what simple shapes read, if everything's right. So see, there's dark strokes, light strokes. I want to make sure my viewer's eye is going to a specific area, and I like it. So that's it. Thanks for checking out this demo. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Again, thank you to Wacom and everyone there for letting me do this. Take care.